My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I'm the Technical Director of Perry Johnson. I'd like to welcome you all to the ISO 9001 2015 Preparing for a Successful Transition webinar. Couple of notes for everyone. All participants are in mute, but we absolutely want to answer your questions. So please use the question portion of the dashboard. We will answer all of your questions at the conclusion of our presentation. One of the more common questions we get is, will a copy of this presentation be made available? And the answer to that is yes. We will have copies available for download shortly after we're finished. I'd also like to mention that this webinar and all other past PJR webinars are also available for reviewing with the voiceover on our website under previously recorded webinars. Our topics for today: we're going to be discussing the origin of the ISO 9001 standard. We're going to review why the changes were so dramatic with the 2015 edition. We will take a fresh look at the timeline, a review of key changes. We will discuss what I'm sure for many of you is an important question, and that is, do you need to overhaul your system? We've got some FAQs from past presentations. Perhaps some of your questions will be answered there. A few concluding remarks, and then your questions. Any standard that is published with an ISO prefix identifies it as a publication of the International Organization for Standardization. Now that's, of course, an English translation of ISO. They are actually based in Switzerland. And what ISO is and what ISO does, it's an international collective, and their sole purpose is the publication of internationally agreed to standards. Now each of those standards is written by and assigned to what's referred to as a technical committee, or TC. Now the technical committee assigned to ISO 9001 is TC 176. Now you may note that means that at the time ISO 9001 was initially written, there were already 175 standards that had been published by the ISO previous to that. So that gives you some idea of the scope of work that they've done in their existence. TC 176 itself also includes members from each of the major industrialized nations, accounting for roughly 75% or so of the world's nations. They all have participation in the preparation and approval of the ISO 9001 standard. The United States representative to TC 176 and to ISO at large is the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. They are based in Milwaukee. As to why the changes were so dramatic on this particular occasion, it's important to bear in mind that the industries that use ISO 9001 and rely on ISO 9001 as a means of managing their supply base, those industries have changed. Those industries have evolved and are going to continue to change and evolve. So ISO has to keep up with the times, so to speak. Additionally, a long-term goal that ISO has had for a very long time for ISO 9001 is to see ISO 9001 continue to grow and to particularly grow in the service sectors. There has been, of course, a great deal of utilization of ISO 9001 in service industries, but they feel that there's room for even more growth. And so part of the rewrite on this occasion was targeted at those potential users. They have tried to simplify some of the language that's been being used. They are trying to aid in understanding, looking for some consistency, not just between companies, but even between auditors, between certification bodies, making sure that people are as much on the same page as possible in terms of understanding these requirements. Perhaps most importantly, one of the aggressive goals that they had, and this actually goes back to the 2008 version. They didn't quite get there at the time, but they have now. They really wanted to improve the cross-compatibility between standards so that for now, if you're a company that has ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 14001-2004, chances are real good that you have two separate documentation systems, two separate systems really. And the writers of the standards and the ISO at large felt that that was not appropriate, that was not value added for the organizations that use these standards, and so there should be greater cross-compatibility, and if a company wanted to achieve 2 or 3 or more certifications, that those standards should be lined up in such a way that it's not such a huge effort to add components to your management system. Nigel Croft, who is the TC-176 chairperson, last year when they were nearing the end of the development of the 9001-2015 standard, he was interviewed in a live web interview, and he was asked, what would you say are the most important things you're trying to accomplish with this new standard? And Nigel spoke very freely, and he said, there are 3 things we want this standard to really promote and push out to the industries that use 9001. And those are process approach, understanding that systems are made up of processes. Processes are how we understand our organizations and should help us strive for consistency and so forth. The cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act is the second attribute. Plan, Do, Check, Act and process approach are very closely aligned ideas. The whole idea that you have a means of checking on the effectiveness of your processes and acting in response, having a planning phase, having controls for the doing phase, and so forth. These 2 ideas are very much nested in each other. The new idea, and as we're going to see, it's not such a new idea, is risk-based thinking. This was the third kind of ideal that Nigel expressed was important about the new standard. And risk-based thinking is really all about preventing undesirable outcomes and looking ahead and being strategic, really, and making sure that your system is limber and can be ready for the challenges that are coming. So process approach, Plan, Do, Check, Act, risk-based thinking. Let's take a renewed look at the timeline. We are getting very close to the end of this process, but let's start by taking a look at where we've been. Now, believe it or not, the work on the 9001 standard goes all the way back to 2012. I'll outline a key date in 2012 in just a bit, but the first publication of what ultimately became 9001-2015 came out in June 2013. That was when we saw the committee draft. That document had a fairly limited distribution, and it was voted on, and what we had then in May of 2014 was a draft international standard. And this was actually a document, believe it or not, that you could have purchased at the time. And some companies did and actually began implementing systems based on that draft standard. The draft standard, in turn, gave way to, in July of 2015, the final draft standard. which was a little more refined, had some notes added to it. The final draft standard was roughly 95% or more a match to what we got in September 2015 when the finished standard was actually published. Now all of these steps are actually mandatory, as we'll see in just a second here. Now looking ahead, we have one final key date to get to in terms of the transition, and that is September of 2018. At that time, ISO 9001-2008 will cease to be a viable standard, and any companies that have not successfully transitioned to the new standard will cease to be ISO 9001 certified. 9001-2015 was published on September 15th of 2015. It is available for purchase directly from the ISO itself, as well as a few other resources. It represents the culmination of 3.5 years of work, going all the way back to the issuance of Annex SL back in 2012. That's actually something we're going to be talking about in just a second here. As I said, the clock is ticking on ISO 9001-2008. The official cutoff has been established as September 14th, 2018. PJR, for its part, we have established a policy on the cutoff for ISO 9001-2008 auditing. That's discussed in part in the FAQ document available on our website at www.pjr.com. It's also available in a more detailed manner in a special client memorandum. If you are a current PJR client, you can inquire with either your salesperson or scheduler to get your hands on a copy of that client memorandum. Now, to understand the key changes to the standard, and really any discussion of ISO 9001-2015, you have to start with Annex SL. Annex SL, you may have heard of it as the high-level outline or the HLO, Annex XL. Annex SL was a very important step in the work that ISO does. Very important step. As the name would imply, it is an annex. It is a part of a larger publication. ISO publicizes the ISO IEC Directives Part 1, Consolidated ISO Supplement Procedure Specific to ISO. This is a standard about how to write standards. It's a self-imposed set of regulations that the ISO follows in the writing of its standards. Now, Directives Part 1, if you are so inclined, it can be viewed. I've provided the link here. It's not anything that's going to have a whole lot of impact on any certified organizations, but if you've ever been curious about where these standards come from, how they are developed, and so forth, Directives Part 1 can shed some light onto how that process works. Now, Annex SL was written back in 2012. It was written by a special committee, the JTCG, and what Annex SL does is it is a 10-section blueprint for authoring of the ISO family of standards. It has mandatory content, mandatory terms. It gives you, if you think of it this way, Annex SL gives you 10 chapters of a book, and it gives you the opening paragraphs of each of those 10 chapters, and then it's up to the technical committee to add the additional information necessary to make that standard appropriate for the industry it's written for. Now, the eventual plan is for all of the ISO standards to be transitioned by 2016 or 2017. Now, obviously, that's a lot of standards, and there are, each of them, they have committees. Some cases, members sit on multiple committees. We have to have voting procedures. We have to respond to commentary from the voting procedures. So it's possible that this process will stretch out an additional year or two, but all of the major standards, all of the standards that have heavy amounts of utilization are either nearing the end of their transition process or are on track for publication in 2016 or 2017. Let's take a look now at the 10-section structure that is mandatory from Annex A. Now the first 3 sections are called Scope, Normative References, and Terms and Definitions. We're actually going to work our way back to those. I've got a separate section for those. The auditable content of the standard begins in Section 4. Section 4 is called Context of the Organization, and there's some very interesting things that are discussed here. We have understanding the context of the organization. We're introduced to the term interested parties. We talk about determining the scope of the system. What are the processes that make up this system? In Section 5, we have leadership and commitment. There's some familiar content here. We have customer focus. We have a defining of responsibility and authority. Section 6 is called planning. We have our primary section for risk-based thinking is here. Quality objectives are found here. Planning for changes is found here. In Section 7, we have support. And Section 7, we have a number of things that all go to kind of supporting the quality system. Things like competency, communication is here. There's a new term called documented information. This is replacing former references to documents and procedures and records. Requirements pertaining to measurement equipment are found in Section 7. If you take Sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 together, what they do in unison is that it gives you the pieces of a quality system base, right? A foundation, something that you can build on. That's how I want you to think of Sections 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, Section 8 is called Operation, and operation you can think of, it's very much in the same vein as the product realization section in ISO 9001-2008. Operation is all of your day-to-day activities, and they're presented in kind of a logical order, an intentional order. We have planning, we have design, followed by externally provided processes. That's your new placeholder for what we would call purchasing. Production and service, release of products, release of services, non-conforming output control. And then Sections 9 and 10, these are linked as well, and these speak to all of the various ways that an organization can control and monitor what it's doing, right? You have internal audits here, management review is here, analysis of customer satisfaction information is here. Each of these things taken together represent an evaluation of the performance of the system. And then in Section 10, improvement, we have responses that can be taken based on those evaluations. So you have things like corrective action, continual improvement. The other way that you can think of the layout of the standard, the auditable portion of the standard, is it does follow a quasi-plan, do, check, act cycle. 4, 5, 6, and 7 represent plan. Section 8 represents do. Section 9 would represent check, and Section 10 would represent act. Now I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive now into new content and give you a sense of what has been added to the standard, what the key changes are. Obviously, risk and risk-based thinking is a big change for the standard, but I would add that it's not such a big change, and we're going to kind of dig into what we mean by that shortly. First of all, it's important to note that this is not a standalone requirement, and it's not something that is viewed as a distinct process. And there's a few reasons why we are able to conclude that. First of all, just simply, the term risk is used a total of 16 times in the auditable portion of the standard. It's used multiple times, and it's used throughout the standard. And the way that it's been explained is risk-based thinking / risk management is intended to be a system-wide strategy. This is not something that is a set of projects that you do on the side and put aside and look at it a few times a month. The standard even says, and I'll point out where a little bit later, you're not even required to have a formal risk management process. The idea is that your risk-based thinking activities are going to be incorporated into your existing processes. And to that end, I'd actually like to show you the wording, the actual wording that's used in Section 6 for this activity. Now, Section 6.1, there's two parts to it. The first part reads as follows. When planning for the system, you shall consider the issues referred to in 4.1, that's issues both external and internal, and the requirements referred to in 4.2. Now, that reference is alluding to interested parties, both internal and external interested parties. So consider the issues, consider the requirements, and determine the risks and opportunities. And it's important that you note that both of those terms are used here, risks and opportunities. This is not just, to kind of simplify it, this is not just about avoiding bad stuff, right? This is about taking advantage of opportunities and recognizing good things and saying, look, there's something good going on here, and we can take advantage of this. What is the purpose of doing this? Well, you want to, as the standard says, enhance desirable effects and produce or reduce undesired effects. And additionally, we want to be sure that our system can achieve its intended results, do what it's supposed to do, and overall, here's another interesting tie-in, achieve improvement and have continual improvement. So there's a recognized correlation between risk-based thinking and continual improvement. It picks up in 6.1.2 where it goes on and it says, all right, so now you've determined these risks and opportunities. Now you need to plan actions to address those risks and opportunities. And furthermore, you need to figure out how you are going to integrate and implement those actions into, and you'll note the wording here, your quality management system processes. So again, it's emphasized this is not about having a separate process. This is about using risk-based thinking or thinking in terms of risks and opportunities and incorporating those things into your existing processes. And then once you've done so, have a means to evaluate the effectiveness of those actions. Now, I want to emphasize that, I've had a number of people say to me, gosh, Joe, this is a tough requirement. How do we accomplish this? How do we do this? Well, I have felt from day one, when I first read through the standard, that what's really going on with risk-based thinking and the way that it's being presented in the standard is it is highlighting something that's been there all along, just kind of under the surface. If you look at ISO 9001-2008, there's a number of mandatory activities that are going to help you demonstrate compliance to risk management. So what are some of those things? Management review, right? You sit down and you talk about what's going on in your quality system, and you identify we can improve this, we can take action in this area, and so forth. That's risk-based thinking. 722, review of requirements related to the product. You're already required to take a look at what your customer is asking you for. What is it that the customer needs from us? How can we be prepared and act in response to what they're asking us for before you get involved, before you get into the middle of a mess? That's risk-based thinking. 622, training or competency. You're already required to look at what are my competency needs, right? What do I have to do to ensure that my staff is up to the challenge? Well, when you take action in those areas, that is also risk-based thinking. And then most obviously, in my opinion, Section 853, preventive action. I know there was a lot of talk, there's still a lot of talk, quite frankly, that preventive action is somehow going away. It's not going away. You're no longer required to have a preventive action procedure. You're no longer required necessarily to have ready-made preventive actions. But I would argue that a good preventive action program under ISO 9001-2008 can absolutely be part of your strategy for showing that you're using risk-based thinking as part of your quality system. Taking a look at some other changes that have been made in the standard. The terms procedures, records, and documents have all been eliminated, and they've been replaced with this kind of collective term, documented information. Now, to fully understand documented information, you do have to refer to one of the annexes, Annex A, subsection 6. And Annex A6 talks about the phrases maintained documented information and retained documented information. And maintained documented information, when you read such a reference within the standard, it is a replacement for past references to document procedures or quality manual. Obviously, some of those things are no longer required. We'll be covering that later as well. One good example of a maintained documented information requirement is Section 4.3. Section 4.3 requires that the scope of the system be documented and available as maintained documented information. Now, the phrase retained documented information, that is a replacement for what we used to refer to as records. And obviously there's quite a few more required records. One good example of that is Clause 933, which requires that records of management review be retained, retained documented information. One very slight change that's been made, any reference to the term product in the body of the standard now reads products and services. Now, I mentioned earlier that part of what they were trying to accomplish with this particular update was a desire for it to be more appealing to service sectors. I think this is a direct byproduct of that particular effort. The term management responsibility has been replaced with the broader term leadership, and the idea is that management leads by example and involvement, not simply directing that activities are performed. Continual improvement as a section, as an idea, it's become part of a larger section simply called improvement. Now, the idea here is that continual improvement is certainly important, but it is by no means the only way that improvement can be realized within a quality system. You can also have breakthroughs, you can have reorganizations, and these are no less credible as examples of improvement. So they've kind of retooled that section a bit to present a broader picture of what is improvement. Suppliers are now referred to as external providers. This is intended to, again, to accommodate service organizations. It's also intended to pull together some requirements that were formerly spread out throughout the standard. ISO 9001, 2008, for example, if you talk about outsourcing, that's found under section 4.1. Suppliers would be in 7.4. So this idea of external providers, it's intended to be a more collective term. There's actually another Annex A section for it, this time A8, and it talks about the fact that external providers, that term, includes not just outside suppliers, but also associate companies and any outsourcing that's done. So pretty much anything that is done outside of the four walls of the quality system that has an impact on the quality system is going to fall under this heading of external providers and be subject to those requirements. Now, you may have heard that 9001:2015 has taken the rather bold step of eliminating some required information. It does not require anymore the quality manual or any procedures, and references to work instructions have been removed as well. Now, what this means for the average company, there's a lot of companies out there that have a procedures manual. Probably most of you on our call today have a procedures manual. And what's important to consider when you're making the decision on, do I still need a procedures manual? Well, do you use your procedures manual? Does your procedures manual do more than just sit on the shelf and get taken down once a year on audit day? If your manuals are a functioning part of your system, there's no reason that you can't continue to utilize them. Now, if you're the type of organization that has other controls in place, other ways of controlling what you do, and you can show that your processes are consistent and effective without procedures and without a quality manual, the standard is now saying that that's completely fine, and those approaches will be accepted. 9001:2015 does not have any mention of a management representative. This is another rather interesting change, and the implication, the idea behind this change is that the function of the management representative was always intended to be one of coordination, one of working as kind of a member of a team, and really all of the key decisions, all of the key legwork would be done by the leadership team, by top management. The framers of the standard felt that too often what was happening was that the management representative was on their own. They were the only ones doing anything pertaining to the running of the quality system, which was never the intention. So they have eliminated the term. Now, this does not mean at all that you as an organization can't appoint a key person. You can even call that person management representative if you're so inclined. But you will be expected to show that the managing of your quality system is done by the leadership team, that it is a shared responsibility. 9001-2015 has eliminated all verbiage pertaining to permissible exclusions, another interesting change. It's been replaced in Section 4.3 with discussion of non-applicable clauses. Furthermore, it's even gone on to say that any clause from the standard can be claimed as non-applicable. Now, we feel that the reality is going to be that the likely exemptions are going to be coming from Section 7 and 8. And in Section 7, really the only section that strikes us as logical for an exemption is the one that pertains to measurement devices. But in theory, we're supposed to be able to consider any exemption. In terms of how you document those exemptions, of course right now permissible exclusions are required to be kept as part of a quality manual. That will certainly continue to be an acceptable approach. However you choose to approach this requirement is up to you. Mentioned this term earlier, interested parties. Let's explore this a little bit. 9001-2015 and any Annex SL based standard are going to include reference to external interested parties, rather. And it's an interesting concept, and it does have an official definition. This is taken from the 9000 standard, and it reads in part, an interested party is a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. Now in the examples they mention some of the obvious: customers, okay, owners, fine, persons within the organization, suppliers, and then they kind of expand it. They talk about bankers, unions, partners, competitors. Now in 4.2 there's an important clarification, and that is that the organization is at its own discretion to determine who the interested parties are, and to do so in such a way that you're considering relevancy to the quality management system. So what's the intent behind this term? Why is this terminology that's being used now? Well, in the past there was a lot of emphasis on the role of the customer. And certainly the customer remains paramount in any quality system certified to ISO 9001. The importance of the customer has not been diminished. But with the term interested party, what they're trying to put across is there are more influences to a quality system than just customers. And we need to recognize that there are additional inputs, and we need to be prepared to act in response to the needs of those additional inputs. What I'd like to do now is a little bit of section by section pointing out the key new requirements and just kind of showing you where they're found in the standard. Section 4, the key new ideas here are the purpose of the organization, identifying who the interested parties are, and then non-applicable clauses. In Section 5, some of the new ideas here are ensuring that we have a leadership structure, ensuring that quality policy and objectives are consistent with the strategic direction of the company, ensuring that the quality policy is available to interested parties, external and internal, ensuring that your quality system has been integrated into business processes. Section 6, as we looked at, is the primary placeholder for risks and opportunities, including taking action in response to said risks. When referring to quality objectives, determining who's responsible, what the target date is going to be, what is it we're trying to accomplish, and so forth. Section 7, the key new idea in Section 7 is organizational knowledge. This is knowledge gained by experience. having a way to retain organizational knowledge, and then having a means of planning for the future as well. Once we get past Section 7, there's very little in the way of new content. There's a little bit of reusing of content. Section 8 has pieces in it from Sections 7 and 8 from 9001-2008, but no significant new content. Section 9 has the primary placeholder for management review. There's a couple of additional discussion points within management review, but otherwise no significant new content. And the same for Section 10, no significant new content. Based on the amount of changes, we have concluded that the changes to the standard overall are minimal and manageable. Frankly, even risk, if you consider it, is not such a new idea, especially if you consider that preventive action has been a part of ISO 9001 since it was first published. What I'd like to do over the next couple of slides, I want to give you kind of a cover-to-cover analysis on the standard, give you a sense of what's where and how you can use the standard. And in the introduction section, we have section 0.1, general, which gives you an overview, some ideas on who the standard benefits, discussion on risk-based thinking, plan, do, check, act, and then it introduces 4 terms that are used in the standard. Now, shall, of course, is a very familiar term, indicates a mandatory requirement. Should, a recommendation. At present, there's no uses within the auditable content. May, this is a permission. This item actually appears once in the standard in section 4.3. And then can, indicating a possibility or capability. And again, numerous instances in the standard. But the key term here, as before, is shall. In section 0.2, we have the 7 quality management principles. There is a reference given to ISO 9000 where these principles are given a more thorough explanation. You'll note that these terms are very similar and in some cases duplicates of what used to be the 8 quality management principles in the former standard. Section 0.3 is called process approach. There's a reinforcing of the process approach and an improved graphic as well. It does talk about the correlation between process approach, plan, do, check, act, and the sections of the standard. Section 033 is the first of 2 key sections that talk about risk-based thinking and explain the importance of the idea. In section 0.4, we have a discussion of the relationship between ISO 9001 and its related standards, 9000 and 9004. Sections 1, 2, and 3, as I mentioned, are non-auditable. Section 1 is called scope. It's some general verbiage on the applicability of ISO 9001 itself. Section 2 is normative reference, and it establishes the linkage to ISO 9000 for all official terms and definitions. Section 3 is called terms and definitions, but interestingly it's without content. As of right now, there are no ISO 9001 specific terms. That may change in the future, but for right now, Section 3 is an empty section. We've already looked at sections 4 through 10, so let's continue with Annex A. Now, of all the content that was written into the standard, it's my opinion that Annex A is probably the most helpful part of the standard. It's an extremely well-written set of ideas, and I think as users of the standard, you're going to find Annex A particularly helpful in discussing some of these finer requirements with your auditors. Annex A1 is called Structure and Terminology. And what Annex A1 says is you do not have to align your documentation to match ISO 9001:2015. And you don't even have to use the specific terms in the standard. So for example, if as of right now you have a procedure numbered 822 for internal audits, that's obviously aligning with 9001:2008, there's no reason that you have to go and retitle that procedure. Furthermore, if you want to keep referring to suppliers as suppliers, do so. There's no reason that you have to suddenly start calling them external providers just because that's what the standard calls them. So this section is intended to help those of you where updating your procedures, updating numerous things just because the numbering has changed, the terminology has changed. If that's wasted effort for you, you certainly don't have to do so. Annex A2 is called Products and Services. There's some discussion here on why they changed all references of product to read products and services. Annex A3 is where we learn about interested parties, including the expanded understanding of who is an interested party. Annex A4 is risk-based thinking. It's an extensive section. I do encourage you to read it. And it's emphasized here that a formal structure and process for risk management is not required. Annex A5 is called applicability. There's some discussion here on why they removed the term permissible exclusions from the standard. A little bit of discussion on the new concept of non-applicables. Annex A6 is called documented information. There's some discussion here on documented information, and as we looked at earlier, maintained and retained. Those are given some discussion here. Annex A7 is called organizational knowledge. There's some explanation of the requirements pertaining to competency, long-term challenges that companies face. And then in A8 we have, as we looked at earlier, discussion of externally provided products and what that phrase means and who it applies to. Annex B provides some discussion on the relationship between 9001 and several of the other publications that ISO has, and then the standard concludes with a bibliography. So to answer a key question, do we have to overhaul our system? Well, I think we've already kind of answered that. And the answer to that is an affirmative no. You do not have to necessarily overhaul your system. One of the things that you have to consider about 9001, it is far and away the most utilized of the ISO standards. There's over 1 million worldwide registered firms that use ISO 9001. And you can't tell 1 million companies that they have to overhaul their system and at the same time claim that you're trying to improve the inclusiveness of the standard. It's just not going to work that way. So, for example, if you have a quality manual that fits your business and it works for you, you can absolutely keep it. If your procedures do a good job of defining your key processes, keep your procedures. If your objectives are well known, if your policy is well known, absolutely keep those things. Let's take a look now at some FAQs that have come up in past presentations. Does our staff have to complete transition training? The amount of training that you give to your staff, this is going to be very much dependent on the amount of revisions that you make to your system. Generally, you will be expected to perform some form of transitional training. At minimum, we would expect that your staff is aware that there is a new standard and that you have explored the impact of the new standard on your team members. Now that said, it's entirely conceivable that the majority of your staff is going to feel no effect whatsoever from a transition to the new standard. For example, if you have somebody out in a shop that comes in every day and runs a stamping machine, that person is going to definitely have some impact, potentially in terms of paperwork, but their day-to-day activity is going to almost certainly be the same, whether it's under ISO 9001-2008 or ISO 9001-2015. Now, what about internal auditors? Do they have to complete transitional training? The thing you have to bear in mind with internal auditing is another competency within your quality system. It's one more function that you as an organization have to determine what does it mean to be competent. So if you have a staff of auditors that have done internal audits for you for years, they know your processes inside and out, they do their audits and they do them well under 9001-2008. It's absolutely conceivable that that team of auditors could do a period of self-study on 9001-2015 and be ready to audit you to the new standard. But it is going to be up to you. And from our vantage point, we will look at the competency of your auditors by virtue of the effectiveness of the audit process itself. Will the other standards be updated? Yes, all of the major sector standards, including TS 16949, AS 9100, and TL 9000, they've all indicated their transition plans and their plan to continue to align with ISO 9001. I know we're getting close with TS 16949. We still don't have a firm publication date. Likewise, we are close on AS 9100 and TL 9000. The only major standard that is not planning to continue to align with ISO 9001 is ISO 13485. ISO 13485 2016 was released in March, and it was written to align with ISO 9001-2008. We've actually got a presentation coming up in a few weeks on ISO 13485 2016. As to whether you should get certified now or wait, there are companies out there, perhaps some of you on the call today, that have been implementing a quality system and even now have been implementing it based on ISO 9001-2008. Obviously, PJR cannot make the final decision for you on whether it's best for you to go for 9001-2008, but we will emphasize that it is July of 2016, and this means that there's a little less than 2.5 years of usability left in 9001-2008. So it's certainly not worthless to be certified to 9001-2008. Now, additionally, we even now, the standard has been out about 10 months. We are still, our auditors are still, for many of them, going through their first couple of audits to this new standard. So it's still relatively new for us as well. And we want to encourage you, if you feel that you have a system that's ready to go for 9001-2008, again, there's still value in doing so. We will accommodate you whenever you feel you're ready to be audited to the new standard. In terms of transitional steps that you can take right now, I always like to highlight the informative document, or ID9, that's published by the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF. IAF you can think of as being kind of the top of the food chain in terms of enforcement of the standards. The auditors all work for certification bodies. The certification bodies, in turn, are monitored by accreditation bodies. The accreditation bodies answer to the IAF. So This comes from a fairly well-placed source. And ID9 recommends a 7-step process for transitioning. First, get yourself a copy of the standard. Purchase the standard and have your management team do an in-depth review of the standard to identify the gaps that need to be addressed. Have a plan of implementation with assigned responsibilities for any gaps that you have. Update your documents if necessary to reflect any new or revised processes. Make sure that you've had awareness and transition training for your staff. Have a full system internal audit followed by a management review meeting. Ensure that your corrective actions for any internal audit findings are in process or complete, and then coordinate with PJR for the planning of your official transition arrangements. I do want to emphasize one final time that your documentation, your quality manual procedures, and so forth, these things need to work for you first and foremost. These are not documents that you write to make the auditors happy. These are not documents that you write necessarily for your customers. These are intended to help your quality system function correctly and consistently. If renumbering it, if rewording it helps your documentation work better for you, then by all means do so, but this will not be required. I want to encourage you also to work with your auditor. In times of transition, your auditors can provide expert analyses of your system against the revised criteria. For many of you, you've had years-long relationships with your auditors. They know your systems, they know your people. They're in a position to provide a lot of valuable help in the transition process. We do feel this is an exciting time for quality system certification. We feel that 9001:2015 is a beneficial update to a standard that's been around for a long time and has already made a lot of contribution to the manufacturing world. We will continue to provide updates on the transition process and ensure that our clients have as smooth a transition as possible. A couple of updates on the support standards. The 9000 standard, the Fundamentals and Vocabulary Standard, was also revised and published on September 15th, 2015. As before, it's a non-auditable document. It's not certifiable. It's still the placeholder for all sanctioned definitions, the 7 quality management principles, even a series of concept diagrams showing the intended interrelationship of ideas. 9004 and 19011 both remain at their current revision for the time being. We have been told that 9004 will be updated. We don't have a firm timeline as to when. 19011, I would say, is potentially a little bit trickier. We've not yet heard anything firm on whether they're going to leave that one alone or also seek an update to it. We've also, for our clients and for the general public, we've prepared a couple of reports that we think will be beneficial. We've done a side-by-side comparison between 9001:2008 and 9001:2015. We've also prepared an FAQ report highlighting key questions and answers. Both of these items can be found on our website at www.pjr.com, right on the home page. I would like to encourage you to join us for one of our other webinars. We have ISO 9001:2015, Critical Points of Review During the Transition Audit Process. That's delivered on a semi-monthly basis. It's a deep dive into new areas that are looked at in the new standard and how they'll be assessed. Interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit is also shown on a semi-monthly basis, exploring the critical topic of processes and how to understand them. And we're premiering a new webinar this month on the 21st. It's called What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit. And I do hope you'll consider joining us for that one. We'd like to keep in touch with you, and the best way for us to do that is if you opt in for future updates. If you go to our website at www.pjr.com, go to the bottom of the home page, input your email address and click subscribe, you will be automatically kept informed of news, changes to the standard, and other points of helpful information. I do thank you, and at this time I will unlock the question portion of the dashboard and see if we have any questions today. We have a question pertaining to the availability of this presentation. It will absolutely be available for download shortly after it's finished. And if you look under previously recorded webinars, again in just a bit you'll find the presentation available for reviewing. Please do share it with all of your colleagues. We have a question from Jeff Conklin. I've been told that AS 9100 may require a quality manual. Is that correct? Jeff, I do apologize. I don't have any information on that at this time, so as they say, I can neither confirm nor deny that that's going to be the case, but we will endeavor to provide some information on AS 9100 as part of our webinar series. Are there any other questions I can answer today? Well, I do thank you all for your time. Have a great day.